troubling Spider-Man facts Marvel wants you to forget. Explored. Spider-Man is one of the most loved superheroes to ever exist. Be it in the comics, the animated series, as Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or Tom Holland, one can never get enough of their wonderful, friendly, neighborhood Spider-Man. But the comics have often branched out into several storylines, some famous and others infamous, where Spider-Man has acted bizarre and done troubling things. Many of those storylines are from issues that have faded into oblivion, and rightfully so. He has taken lives, ruined lives, been a terrible boyfriend, been a bad superhero, been a horrible ally, and the list goes on. And for several of these instances, he was old enough to understand the gravity of his actions. With great power comes great responsibility. But sometimes, things get to his head. Other times, he acted out due to biological reasons that made him do certain things. With reference to Spider-Man 3, where the symbiote caused Peter Parker to act differently, fans can excuse his behavior because it wasn't really him. However, Spider-Man has snapped and done questionable things by himself without external influences, because he could not control his emotions. Spider-Man has been a menace, as J. Jonah Jameson would say, and this has happened on several occasions. Spider-Man as a hero or a character aside, strange things have happened in the storyline itself for which you should not blame Peter Parker, but the writer or the writers. Here is a list of some of the weird, troubling things that have taken place in the Spider-Man comics.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I love you so much, Peter.
He has radioactive sperm. Well, technically, he does not have radioactive sperm, but there does exist a separate story where this strange situation is canon. Spider-Man Reign is set in an alternate Earth, or an alternate universe where New York has been overrun by villains. It's been a while since Peter Parker has been Spider-Man, and is instead plagued by age and sorrow. Mary Jane is dead, which is something we find out in issue 3. Things get dark when you learn that Spider-Man himself killed Mary Jane. This act, however, was not intentional and will be entering the zone of TMI, but the cause of her death wasn't the most heinous. Spider-Man had gotten his powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider. This subsequently changed him on a cellular level. As a result, his body fluids turned radioactive as well. So it was Peter Parker's sperm which, when inside Mary Jane's body, caused the damage. And one of the worst cons of unprotected sex, his radioactive sperm invaded and overpowered her body. It caused cancer and made it spread until it was incurable, and eventually, she passed away. Not very romantic if you ask me. Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn. When Michael Straczynski wrote Spider-Man, Sins Past, and One More Day, the continuity of the storyline got screwed up royally. To make matters worse, a particular story arc revolves around an image where Norman Osborn is seen having sex with Gwen Stacy. To think that Green Goblin and Gwen Stacy would have been caught in the act is crazy. Sudden plot twists are fun, but Straczynski did not understand the assignment with this one. It is also considered to be one of the worst comics of the 2000s, and rightfully so. The cringe does not end here. Gwen Stacy also becomes pregnant with twins, a boy named Gabriel and a girl named Sarah. They were born in France and genetically modified, allowing them to age rapidly. They also consider Peter Parker to be their father, and yet were dead set on killing him. All in all, this feels and sounds less like a legit Spider-Man arc and more like a fanfiction written on Wattpad by a 14-year-old teenager who has the weirdest taste in Spider-Man ships and has forgotten about maintaining continuity. Spider-Man feasted on his wife and Aunt May. When storylines move away from Earth 616, some wild things take place. If a radioactive sperm story and an affair between Green Goblin and Gwen Stacy weren't awkward enough, there's always Earth 2149. Life was fine in this world until people started to turn into zombies due to a plague. This is not the weirdest part of the storyline. In a not-so-ambitious crossover, Spider-Man has teamed up with Ash from Evil Dead in this universe. Thanks, but no thanks, to the Necronomicon, Ash arrived in this universe. The Necronomicon was also responsible for the spread of the plague. When Peter realized the gravity of the situation, he rushed home to save Aunt May and Mary Jane. But his Michael Jackson thriller instincts kicked in, and after a series of convulsions, he turned into a zombie. Instead of breaking out into choreography, however, he decided to have a meal instead, and Mary Jane and Aunt May were right there. Peter Parker then feasted on the two people he loved so dearly because he probably loves food more. He also ate up J. Jonah Jameson later, but that's justified. But there's a strong chance he isn't seasoned enough. Spider-Man hid a pregnant Mary Jane. Peter Parker has partaken in terrible behaviors which fans conveniently decide to ignore, and poor storylines help with ignoring it. One such instance would be in Spectacular Spider-Man by Sal Buscema, Tom DeFalco, and Bill Sikowicz. Spider-Man's I'm the Spider phase was his version of the annoying teen phase, but being married to Mary Jane came with its perks. She knocked the phase right out of him and made him a normal guy again. She was also pregnant. Yay! Peter Parker got over the phase and life went back to normal. Things were fine until Ben Reilly made claims about Peter Parker being a clone while Ben was the real Peter. Finding out that you are a clone can cause an unfortunate identity crisis, which caused Peter Parker to act out. Peter believed that Ben was trying to steal his life by calling him a clone, and that he was lying. He attacked Ben when Mary Jane got caught in the crossfire. She intervened to mediate the situation, but in the heat of the moment, Peter Parker smacked her right across the room. Fortunately for Peter, Ben's claims did turn out to be a lie, as Ben was the clone, but that does not excuse Peter's behavior. The arc went faded into obscurity because everyone conveniently ignored it. He sold his marriage to the devil. Aunt May might be young in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in Raimi's universe and the comics, she is quite old. She has lived a long life, and honestly, if she dies at this point, it's not really a big deal because, surprise, she is old enough. During the Civil War, an enemy of Spider-Man took advantage of the situation where Peter's secret was revealed to the public. The enemy shot Aunt May to finish her off and pushed Peter into a more loss and misery. Having lost his parents and uncle, Peter obviously did not wish to lose Aunt May, so with Mary Jane, he made a deal with the devil, Mephisto. This deal allows Peter to save Aunt May and make his identity secret again, but the price to pay was his marriage to Mary Jane. Mephisto also shows the couple the child they would have together, but Spider-Man and Mary Jane sabotage their future to save a very old woman, whose death is likely to make a very tiny difference. The editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, Joe Quesada, wanted to allow Peter Parker to maintain his longevity in the market for the next 20 or 30 years. However, the storyline had progressed too far ahead and he wanted an emptier canvas to work on, which is why he dissolved their marriage. Kraven's last hunt was lethal. Spider-Man is indeed known for his exciting arsenal of villains, and Kraven the Hunter, who is part of the Insidious Six, is no longer strange to this. He is one of Spider-Man's most strongest and lethal foes. In Kraven's last hunt, things get gut-wrenching. After Kraven kills Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, he buries Peter alive. Yikes. Kraven then assumes Peter's identity as Spider-Man. Kraven is naturally a lot more sinister, and the story enters several disturbing territories. He captures Vermin, who Spider-Man had defeated in the past with Captain America. When Spider-Man reappears after 2 weeks, having dug out of his own grave, Kraven makes Vermin attack him, as Vermin believes that Spider-Man had captured him, when he was actually Kraven disguised as Spider-Man. In the end, Spider-Man turns Vermin over to the police and Kraven commits suicide, as he spends a good portion of the story being existential. However, his problems do not excuse his act of burying Spider-Man alive. Beating Daredevil to death? Almost. Captain Jean was one of the very few cops who was nice to Spider-Man. In the death of Jean DeWolf, Spider-Man is in a bad place, following the death of Jean in the hands of a serial killer called Sin Eater. Turns out DeWolf had a huge crush on him for quite some time and could never express it to him. Learning this really took Spider-Man to a bad place. And if it wasn't enough, the Sin Eater ended up almost murdering Betty Brant, his first girlfriend. Things went off the roof and Spider-Man, now enraged, snapped. Spider-Man recklessly attacked the Sin Eater with the intent to kill. The blind hero Daredevil, who had allied himself with Spider-Man in taking down the Sin Eater, intervened to make Spider-Man stop. But Spidey punched Daredevil right out of a window and then pummeled him even though they were allied. Thanks to Spider-Man's recklessness, his attacks were a lot less controlled and the Daredevil was able to dodge them with ease. He killed Charlemagne. Jim Owsley, Al Williamson, and Mark Bright joined hands to create the one-shot Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. In the first issue, Peter and Ned are in Germany. They're investigating an arms dealer named Charlemagne, who turns out to be one of Wolverine's old associates. But the catch lies in the fact that every government agency was hell-bent on killing her off. Push comes to shove and things begin to complicate. Ned is killed and Peter was almost about to suffer the same fate, but Wolverine comes to his rescue and saves Peter. Together, they track Charlemagne and find her in East Berlin. Charlemagne had taken up a job for the KGB, but she was set to suffer and die from a torturous death in the hands of the KGB. Wolverine decided to spare her from the terrible fate by killing her himself, but Spider-Man is against it. As a result, the both of them got into a fight even though the situation could have been settled with a simple rock, paper, scissors. As the fight gets out of hand, a Soviet chopper intervenes and uses gunfire to stop them. Charlemagne wants to die. She grabs Spider-Man, who is completely heated at the moment due to the fight. As she grabs him, he turns towards her and out of instinct hits her with a lethal punch as he thought that she was Wolverine. However, Charlemagne does not survive the punch and dies. Now, Charlemagne is a smart girl because she wanted to die and use the situation and Spider-Man's mental state to her advantage. But that still makes things a bit messed up, because how are you unable to differentiate a metahuman from a regular person, despite having spider senses? Spidey started to rob jewelry stores. In Amazing Spider-Man number 87, written by Stan Lee, John Romita, and Jim Mooney, Spider-Man engages in a very bizarre and out-of-character act. Not that he hasn't before, but similar to the time when he turned into a zombie, Spider-Man's act here was a result of a biological situation. The radioactivity that made him Spider-Man was now turning against him. It caused him to develop an illness, which resulted in him acquiring a restless and bizarre state of mind. He turned delirious and could not use his powers properly because the radioactivity was draining his powers as it drained his blood. It was Gwen Stacy's birthday, and Peter had forgotten to get her a gift. With a disturbed mental state, the need to buy his girl a gift caused him to break into a jewelry store and rob a necklace. He wasn't a bad guy per se, because when he realized what he did and his conscience kicked in, he put the jewelry back in its place. Maybe if a man truly loves you, he will rob a store for you. It would have been romantic if both Peter and Gwen Stacy were antagonistic. What did you think of these troubling facts? Did you enjoy this video? If yes, don't forget to leave a like and comment on the video. Till then, goodbye and have a nice one.